right, so you may remember that in Lecture 2 we discussed the possibility that technical writing was served the purpose of a sort of currency in engineering. And we said that if that's the case, if technical writing is a sort of currency in engineering, then that's because technical writing is how engineers receive credit for their ideas. We talked about a number of examples of why that may or may not be true. And we're left a lot of the time wishing we had the opinion of a leader in industry to solve the question for us. Today we do have a leader in industry. I must tell you that I don't know what he'll tell us. He may well tell us that technical writing does not matter to engineering or to engineering careers. I don't know. But at least we have him and we can ask. So today visiting us is Dr. Randy Sylvester. He received bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees in electrical engineering here at the University of Utah. Today he works at L-3 Communications. It's a large defense contractor, and you may have noticed their operations out by the airport at CS West. His role at L3 CS West is as Chief Technologist. So he is in charge of the company's research and development from top to bottom. His area of expertise is statistical communication theory, digital signal processing, and error correction coding. So I present to you Dr. Randy Sylvester. Thank you.
So what majors are here then? Electrical, so you're one of me. Any other besides electrical? No? Oh, okay. Then we'll be able to relate really well. So I put together just a few slides just to get discussion going, but that's not what it's about. So let's see. Okay, there we go. So, value of technical communications, and I don't know, you've been talking about it here, so let me just put up, okay. So, how many of you are good public speakers? We got 1, 2, all right. And then, how many consider yourself good technical writers? Okay, another one. So we've got some interest, I guess, in getting to be better technical writers. So in Robert Fulghum, in one of his books, he's the one that wrote Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. He would ask in a class, say first graders, kindergartners, how many of you sing? How many hands do you think went up? Everybody sang. But then he'd ask in his class at the university, and maybe one hand would go up and they'd qualify. I only sing if. So, are you really public speakers and good writers? You just got it beat out of you somewhere? Did somebody have a bad English teacher at some time that just critiqued and criticized everything you wrote? You see what I'm saying? Maybe some of it's a mind thing. So let's talk a little bit about a motivation for... So surveys show that most people fear death less than speaking in front of other people. And it even has a name, glossophobia. And estimates are 75% of people. How many of you have fear of speaking? And it probably kind of goes over into the writing too, because when you communicate, when you put something in writing or you put something in verbalization, that's you, right? That's you going out there. And the fear is you get rejected. Somebody thinks, what's that quote? It's better to be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt, I think is. And so that's part of what happens, but it doesn't have to be that way. See, as an engineer, see an engineer there with some lasers going, as an engineer, My job is just to develop the best technical solution. So why do I need communication skills? So what are your thoughts?
Because you're not working by yourself.
Okay.
You have communication skills to communicate with other people that are working with you.
Yeah, if you work by yourself, you won't be able to sell the solution, you won't be able to propose the solution to somebody else that might improve on that solution.
Okay.
There couldn't be as much of a progress unless we have good communications.
So I think you had 2 points, that you're probably going to need to work in teams. And so communication skills are essential for teamwork. And then you hit another one, a proposal. What happens when you make a proposal? You possibly can get funding, right? And so you have an idea here, and maybe have even done some research to show it's a really good idea, but then what's going to happen with it if you can't communicate? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, my employer, when I was being interviewed, asked me, well, he first said, we'll be working with a lot of critical information. Therefore, how will you make sure that you understand what we want you to do? So, I mean, getting things mixed up just because you don't understand, because you didn't get the information, or because you're not giving it back.
Well, and a good point. Let's say it's your manager or team leader or whoever you're trying to get the information from, and they're a bad communicator. But then they punish you for not understanding what they're saying to you. Anybody been in that situation? That's I didn't know that's what you were asking for. Look what you wrote. You don't do that usually, but yeah, if you can't write clearly or speak clearly, communicate clearly, mix-ups happen, confusion happens. Okay? So, a few reasons. Any others you can think of? Okay, so this is the reality. Engineering fields that effective communication skills are crucial to success. Because this is the other thing that happens, and I've seen it over and over with my colleagues. They're brilliant, but they can't present their brilliance, either written or oral, very well. I was going to bring an example, I couldn't find it though, but a fellow I worked with, he gave me this paragraph. It says, go implement this in software. And it was just this little equation. I said, would it be okay if I figured out what was going on here? And he was brilliant. And it turned out what it was is doing a mean estimate in a Gaussian random variable. So trying to find the mean. And you can translate that to signal to noise ratio of the communication system. That turned into a 10 to 15 page technical paper about Bayesian estimates. He wrote it there, and I could have coded it up just perfect, but then the idea was gone, right? So writing it down, doing the technical paper, made it so that concept has been there ever since. People still use that paper to figure out how to do that in other systems. Because the code he told me to write only worked on that little system that we were working on at the time. So you see the flavor of how that is. And then you see the bottom. They're crucial for success as engineers work in and among varied groups. So the key is you're never going to work alone. You're always going to work in a team. You're always going to need to communicate, and guess what? The person, how many had a senior project here? Did anybody work a senior project here?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Mostly juniors.
Oh, you're juniors right now. Okay. Watch something that happens. You'll get a session lead, and it'll look, and it won't even matter who did all the work. It'll look like that session lead did all the work because they take the lead in communicating. And that's the way it is at jobs. If you're the one writing the report, you're the one up in front presenting and communicating the concepts and the ideas, that's what management sees, right? That's what customers see. And so the credit kind of flows that way just naturally, no matter how good your ideas are. Now, the person presenting knows how good you are, and hopefully your manager does, but that's not bubbling out like it could if you were the good communicator in the group. Okay. So, here's just a few views. Paul Meyer, I'm not sure who he was, but it's a good quote. It's communication, the human connection is the key to personal and career success. It really is. It's the key. This one down here, good communication does not mean that you have to speak in perfectly formed sentences and paragraphs. You know, there's slick salesmen. I mean, you see them every day on the TV. But again, that comes through too. When you're good and you can talk about what you're working on, either written or oral, that comes across. Your ability to do that. And then you see the last one, the CEO of Semiconductor. It's absolutely essential to effective leadership. Going back to what you said, if I'm not a good communicator and I start giving people instructions and they start messing up and it's my whole team that's messing up, that's going to cause a problem, right? Okay. So how well can I communicate my ideas technically or my ideas from a team standpoint? Yeah. Let me show you a few that you'll be running into quickly. Our resume is written communication, right? And so that's going to be important to you. Job interviews, what we do when we interview someone, when I was the group lead in the communications group, we put somebody at the board, give them a piece of chalk, and say, draw a BPSK system. Put as much detail as you want in there. If they were master students, we would say, give us an oral report about your research or one of your major projects as a master student. PhD student would have to present their thesis work. When that person got done, we could look at each other and say, we're tucking him in a back room, or her. Or we can put that person in front of customers. That's good. You can tell the communication skills through that interaction. And then we would always ask for examples of their written work too, so you can see that too. Real quickly, you can see how good that person is at getting their ideas across. We had one who kind of, so a professor recommended this person, did horrible in the interview, and we called back and said, are you sure this person's good? And the professor gave us another, yeah, I know what you're talking about, but he's good. And so we hired him, and it worked out okay, but it took 2 verifications from somebody else because their ability to communicate didn't show that they were good. Okay. Next one. You talked about teams, right? If you want your ideas to be part of the team, you better be able to communicate those ideas clearly, precisely. Collaboration, you talked about that, you need that. I'm thinking about this, and that person comes back and says, oh, have you thought about this too? And you have those conversations. And then the ability to report the results. This was a failure. This was a success. This is why. This is how much better it is. I'll give you another example that a math teacher told me. He was in a thesis defense for a PhD student in mathematics, and the fellow showed all his stuff, all the equation he'd solved, and old professor looked at it and said, do you realize that's only works on the empty set? Just trashed his whole, he had to start over. I mean, you can do a whole bunch of things on the empty set, right? So the communication in the interim between him and his advisor and what he was showing, that wasn't good because he ended up clear at the end when he was trying to defend with that kind of an issue. So, and then required to obtain financing for ideas. This is what I do a lot now, is proposal writing, oral presentations, and demonstrations. So I wrote a proposal last Friday, sent it off. I'll be in the Pentagon on Thursday doing a briefing. So again, all of these things. The Pentagon briefing is actually informational. But guess what happens if I do a good job? The contacts are set up, they're going to call, they're going to say, I want to see more, and we start getting those relationships working. Okay? And then the last one of the surefire ways to get funding is if you can demonstrate something and really communicate what's happening. In our area, communications, it's hard to show something exciting, right? Like if you pick up a cell phone, the app's what's exciting. It's not what's going through the air. But if you saw behind the screen what was happening in terms of the communication, the cell towers handing off the calls, how you put lots of callers in the same area, how you keep calls from dropping, all those things are really, really exciting, but that's not what people care about. Same thing with our customers. Hey, is my app working? Am I getting the bandwidth I want? Is this? And so how do you show that? How do you communicate that and not get caught up in talking about the details of what air correction code is in that waveform traveling through the air? Whereas the designer, the engineer setting up the system, they care about that. So you got to know your audience too. You got to know who you're talking to be effective. So, just some opportunities you have here at the university. Reports. So in the workplace, that would translate to project reports and proposals. Presentations, those will translate to design reviews. So when you're working on a project, you always have to do design reviews to show where you are, what successes you're having, what troubles you're having. Status updates, marketing support functions. Down at the bottom, peer-reviewed papers, so getting published. So one of the criteria, and I do reviews for some of the conferences and things, one of the criteria is it well written? Give me a grade. And that's a big part of whether they accept a paper or not. And then white papers are, you send those out to customers to try to get interest. Like this presentation I'm doing, you can do papers that way too. So we had, oh, now I messed up here. We had Ed Catmull here Friday, and he is the president of Pixar. He came out of the University of Utah, computer science. And he made Pixar a great success. And then when Disney bought Pixar, they put him in charge of both arms, Disney and Pixar. You read this book about how that happened from the beginning, from the university days to where he is now, and there is nothing but the communications that he had in the teams and the working that he did that made it successful. I had just a minute with him. I said, so do you have any advice? I'm going to speak to some students on Monday. And he said, not a short answer. I said, well, that's your whole book, isn't it? And he goes, yeah. That whole book is saying how important communications are. And when you go to some place to interview, that's a good question to ask. How do you facilitate communication between people in the organization? And if they don't have a good way for you to interact with others, it's probably not a good place to work. I'll tell you that right now. Communication is the key to success. So with that, kind of a simple presentation, but what questions do you have for me?
You compare like some of the more veteran engineers who've been working for a while, and you compare them to the students that are just finishing up graduating and starting off their career. Do you see a pretty big difference? Are we improving kind of as a whole, electrical engineers? Or are the newer engineers better at communicating, would you say, than the veterans?
It's kind of interesting because some people never do learn how to communicate. They just don't. And because of that, it limits their possibilities for advancement. So in comparison, it really depends on the person. So I started as a co-op, and there was a senior engineer there, and he left, went to Microsoft, did really well, but he spoke at least 2, maybe 3 languages, so he was really good in linguistics. And I would take my papers to him and have him proofread them, and they would come back just red. So many problems. And I would go, oh, crestfallen and sad because it was so bad. And then I would do what he said, and the paper would sound so much better. My biggest problem in those days was being verbose. Do you know what that means? You take a whole bunch of words to say a little bit of information. So he would just like cross out a whole line and say, and I'd read it and go, oh, that does sound better. But because of that feedback and my openness to let him critique, I learned from him, and I could write better after I got done. Same thing with my dissertation. They ripped it apart pretty good, the professors. And you'll see that on some of your papers when you write. There'll be a lot of red on them. Don't be upset about that, because now you say, okay, what is it that's bad about this? In fact, just before I came up today, we're writing a proposal. I'm what's called pink team. We call different colors of teams depending on which phase or which stage of the proposal it's in. And I was critiquing the writing, saying, you're not telling the story that this proposal is asking for. You need to do this. You need to do this different. And if they'll take that well and make the changes that as a group, the team reviewing has done, it'll be a better proposal. But they don't have to. They can keep it the way it is if they want. So, again, I think it's on an individual basis as to how good anybody is at communicating. Some are just natural, some do it really well. Some have had experiences that have helped them get there faster. So.
What do you recommend to get experience communicating or writing? I mean, is there anything people can do at their jobs or even at the university just to get more experience and more, as you said, critiques?
Right. Well, it's getting involved in situations where you can write. You know, if a professor, they're doing a proposal, even at a bachelor's level, you can go talk to them and say, hey, I would like to work on that. And just seeing, even if you just write a small piece or you just are involved in somebody writing what you're doing, but you've got to do it. There's no way to get good at writing or speaking without doing it. It's impossible. It's experience and practice. Like some of the things they said in some of the things I read preparing, there's clubs like Toastmasters where they stand up and speak all the time and they help each other to do better. One of the things engineers tend to do, they'll dwell on a word. Like one of the words that a lot of people say where I work is basically, and it's a filler word. Basically, and then they say 3 sentences, basically. Or you've probably heard somebody go, and then they throw ums in there. And you get into habits like that. You want to fill the space with something. Well, you have the same thing with writing. It's okay in your first draft just to drop all your mind on the paper, put all the words you want in. But then once that's done, you have to go back and clean it up. What's the real structure? How do I really put these things where I want? Is this clear or not? You'll have something like, it does this, and you go, what does it refer to? It could refer to like 4 different things, the way I've written it. So it is what? You see what I'm saying? So you look for those kinds of things. Do I have clarity? Do I have precision? Did you have?
Yeah. Basically, it's a question when, so after a presentation, you evaluate. What's the most weight do you put on the problem statement, the introduction, or the actual results? What is the most weight you put on?
So it depends on the audience. It really does. So let's say I'm trying to get funding, right? For some research that I'm doing. I want to give them enough results and enough concept of what I've done to know that it's meaningful, right? That there's something there, that I've done enough work that it's not just totally weird or not going to work. But then I also want to put on the other side, here's what will happen if you fund this. If this works and you fund this, this is what you get out of the end.
So it's both.
Yeah. Depending, again, on the audience. Sometimes process matters a lot and results are okay. Or sometimes I don't care what process you used, I want to know what results you got. And what that means to me. That's the other key, is saying, like if I tell you, I did this to my system and I gained 5 dB. Does that tell you anything, really? What do I have to tell you besides that? And 5 dB gives you this much more bandwidth, this much more data throughput. 5 dB gives you this much more range. 5 dB gets you this much smaller of an antenna. I have to be able to equate that to something that the person I'm talking to cares about. So you got to know your audience, you really do. When you write or when you present, you have to figure out what is my audience going to care about, and then how do I communicate that idea based on what I know my audience knows. So, the hardest one is when you have a mixture of technical and non-technical and trying to make an idea make sense to everybody. Really tough. In fact, this classroom is named after Tom Stockholm, right? He's the father of digital sound, kind of invented CD technology. I was in a classroom with him, and you know bad professors, right, that can't communicate. And you know good professors that are really good at communicating. Well, he was on the board, and he was talking about Laplace transforms. And he said it's like a rubber sheet, and a pole is like a pencil. He's kind of drawing it up on the board, and the zero is like a thumbtack, and you can kind of picture it. And then I drive my car along the axis, that's the Fourier transform. We're all going, oh yeah, I see that. And then this guy that was majoring in math raised his hand and asked a question. I can't remember what he asked, but he moved over to the other chalkboard and did about a board full of equations. And he looked at the guy and he said, does that answer your question? And he said, yes. And he comes back over, gets in his car, and starts driving on the rubber sheet again. So that's a good professor that can relate to everyone in the class.
From what you have noticed in your experience, how great of a difference do you see in the quality of work that engineers with technical writing skills and engineers without technical writing skills?
Well, see, and that's funny because sometimes the ones that don't write very well are very, very good at doing code, like software or VHDL or some of those things, and that's okay. Again, put them in the back room, let them code, but don't put them in front of anybody. And see, this is the thing, like with the guy that I worked with that I had to write the paper. At the beginning when I first started, they put me with him because they knew he didn't write anything. And so they said, you follow him around and you capture everything he's doing on paper. And so you can be very, very good technical and still have relative success But you will not be a manager, you will not be a vice president or president, you won't do any of those things. You won't be out marketing, you'll be in the back room.
So are you saying people without much technical skill, I mean writing at least, they won't be able to receive much credit for what they do?
They'll receive very localized credit. So the people that work with them will know that they're that good, but their face won't be out in front. It's just the way it is. Because, again, if I'm the one sitting up here telling you the concept, even though back behind the curtain somebody else did it, and I can say, I'll tell you that person did it, they still put my face with it. They do. Or they put my face with the report. You know, on every report, I gave him credit. I said, this was this guy's work. It didn't matter in terms of, but in that case too, he didn't want to be a manager, so that was fine. You know, he didn't want to be a leader. He wanted to be in the back room. So, does that make sense?
Yes.
Are there any softwares you guys use to help improve your technical writing?
But just spell checkers, grammar checker. But we have, see, that's the other thing is those things kind of spoil you sometimes because they'll flag some things. But the bottom line is the message right is more critical than it is. Those things have to be right, don't get me wrong. But a lot of people can correct grammar and spelling. Not a lot of people can get the idea onto the paper. That's the difference. So if you can do that, you can get the idea onto the paper fairly clearly. Somebody else can come clean up your grammar and stuff if that's the issue. But
Do you actually see much improvement within technical writing or communication skills of engineers that are already out on the field that start out, not being able to communicate very well, but like, do you see actually like people making like improvement to the point where they could be those people out there presenting? Like, is there much of that? Or is it
if they're willing, yeah, if they're willing. Yeah, if they have interest, we can set up the chances or the opportunities for them to do that.
And do you guys like offer like maybe some type of like workshops, stuff like that to help engineers within? Okay.
Yeah, there's always training for things like that. Like there's a great proposal writing class, how to read what the customer's asking for and then translate that into what you write. That's a big skill there. Understanding. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities if you're willing. And that's one thing you need to say right off. Like in your job interview, you say, I really want to learn to communicate well. Do you have the opportunity for that here? And that's kind of a subtle question because then I as a manager go, oh, nice, this person's gonna help me with reports and presentations and things. This is good. It'll put that thought in my mind that you care about that.
Okay, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to know your thought process and what you do in a situation if you were given one candidate that was better at the interview, had better communication versus another candidate who, if you were to ask for their report and then it was better than the first candidate, which one would you consider for that position that you're hiring for that? It requires both communication and written technical.
Wow. I don't know. It depends on the situation and what the position would be. But both of them would be in the running. If they can communicate well this way or this way, they're both still in the running. Now again, if they get up on the board and they can't do what they say they can do. See, we had a person once come and say, I'm an expert at communication theory. I wouldn't put that on my resume. I would not, and I'm pretty good at communications, but I would let the interviewer decide if I was an expert or not. And then they got on the board, couldn't do anything. I couldn't even do the first step in the, and so it depends, yeah, it depends. If two people are both good at communications, I'd have to look at them both, and then we'd have to probably use other things to decide.
So, from many of the sources I've heard, technical writing is like a top tier characteristic, well, especially within the engineering industry, which that implies that it's kind of rare to come by. It's a bit unique, I guess you could put it. My question is technical writing becoming more and more important? Was it taught poorly years back? Is it a rare characteristic for an engineer to have, or is it a combination of these thoughts?
Again, I think it depends on the person. So, if you went into engineering at any time, say back in the day, and you had that idea in your head that engineers don't have to write, that's why I'm going into engineering, because, man, I did bad in my English and the places where I had to write, I didn't do so well, but I did really well in math, and so I'll be an engineer. And that happens. I mean, that's what people do. And so I think it's that idea that's misconception. For example, one of the things that happened with me, I was working as a student helper down there, student aid, and I was in the probability class. Well, we do stochastic communication theory, probabilistic. I mean, it's pure. So I'm sitting in the class, and I'm with another engineer, and the engineer student. He said, "I can't wait to get out of this class. I never want to see this again." I go, "No, you got to pay attention. That's all they do at my work." You know, you just get in your head some concept that I don't need this. In fact, that's what you're here for right now. Is your toolbox as an engineer isn't hammers and screwdrivers and those kinds of things. It's capabilities and things you can do because you're being educated. You know, mathematics, the physics, the specializations you do in the engineering field, control theory, communications, those kinds of things. That's your toolbox. And if you put in there technical writing, you can do the jobs that require technical writing. Whereas if that tool's not in your box, you can't come with your signal processing hammer and hit that nail, you know? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's tools. And so people have developed differently that way. Some people don't like, it goes back, they'd rather die. They'd rather die than give a public speech. And so some people would rather die than write something too, if you're in that mode. Okay, figure out your career based on what are my options without that tool.
That makes sense.
Yeah. You will.
How do international companies deal with the language barriers for the technical writing in this?
Yeah, so that's the fellow that was my mentor. He could speak Japanese and Chinese. And he went to work for Microsoft doing the international. So he was that good at language that he could do the writing in both languages. And so you need people like that too.
Okay.
And that's a big deal.
And what about law?
Can I defer to you on that one?
Well, my understanding is you've taken over the IP operations at L3. Yeah, what's the question, Alex?
How do they deal with the writing of law? I guess like the formats and the type
Internationally or different
no, just
questions?
in general. That was a separate side question.
Well, usually there's quite a specialization in law. You'll find people that started as an engineer and then went to law school and then started performing in patent law, either quite often on the prosecution side, writing patents, obtaining patents, sometimes on the litigation side. It's kind of it's another tool. It's a specialty. There's a different diction for writing legal documents than most others. It's a diction that bothers a lot of people because it seems like legalese, right? It's very precise, but sometimes errs more on the long-winded side because it's trying to pin people in a very narrow area. But it's a specialty.
So it's not anywhere compared to, I guess, technical writing in the electric field?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Say again, I couldn't hear.
So is it anywhere compared to the technical writing of electrical, I guess, specs or, I don't know?
Yeah, well, I'd say there's a huge correspondence. I mean,
Big over that.
my business, that's what I do, is I am a patent attorney, and so technical writing is my bread and butter. And some of the time, it's very much on the technical side, and it depends on audience, like you said. If I'm working with engineers, then it looks like an IEEE paper, like we were looking at earlier. If I'm talking to businessmen, or to attorneys, or to investors, then it's different. And it depends how legal the diction comes off, depending on what my audience is. But it's highly related. And the skill of technical writing and communication is so essential in law. Yeah, it's like engineering. You have to have that too.
In fact, that's all you do, is, in some sense. You either are talking to someone, or you're writing to something. So we would give someone like Ryan, we'd hand him a technical paper and expect him to understand it and be able to make the transition from that technical paper into patent language. So that's what. And the better that attorney is at that, the less the whole process costs, which is nice, and the happier we are. So I just did one. Someone sent court a letter saying, "You violated our patent." And so,
Cease and desist.
well, call us by this date and let's work out some licensing. And so I had to write up a whole thing on why our stuff is different than what they did. Send it to the corp attorney. So it's fun.
Do you think technical writing and communication is taught enough in our undergraduate program? And would you recommend engineering students to take more writing classes?
Well, that's the thing, is you've got, I don't know how many hours you have to do liberal arts kinds of things. And I know it's a little bit different kind of writing, but it's still getting your ideas on paper. So any classes you can take with a writing piece to it. So if you want to go into law, you're probably going to do engineering plus something else with a lot of writing, right? And so it depends on what you want to accomplish on the back end. If you're going to go into law, you are going to have to take a lot of classes where you write. You just have to. If you're going to go into engineering and you want to work into management, then when you get on teams, make sure you're one of the main ones writing up the reports that happen in the teams. When you write reports for labs and things like that, make sure they're done very well. You know, ask your TA, so how did that read? Any suggestions on how that could have been better? Just every time you have a chance to write, always get feedback. Don't just look at it, oh, look at all this red. Done like this, took off 5 points. Here, go talk to them. Why didn't you like this? Why didn't this? You see what I'm saying? So take advantage of the situations when you do write to get the feedback.
Can you just look back at your career and tell us how, I mean, your perspective now, how you went from being an intern or a co-op to being in the position you are now as chief technologist? I'm just wondering, when you were on those teams, was it sort of a volunteer effort? You volunteered to write the report or to stay after hours to be on it? Or how did you, when you look back, where were the stepping stones?
Well, and that's the key, is that, and I didn't do it consciously, but at the times when there were reports to be written, I wrote. And again, at first they were horrible, they got beat up a lot, but then as it got better and better, then I got more and more opportunities to write on the proposals and the different things that we were doing. It's pretty satisfying to be able to write a proposal and win a big contract for your company, or convince an investor. You know, I haven't done that, but convince an investor that they want to put some money on your idea, that idea is good enough to put a bet on. So I've evaluated some of those, but I haven't written any of those kinds. Okay.
As an international student, will it affect your, like, when applying for a job, will it affect your chances being hired since English is not your first language?
Some of our best people have English as a second language because they very, very carefully focused on being able to do it well. And in some sense, doing it as a second language, you know the structure better than some of us that speak it as a first language. And so you can actually do better in a lot of cases. There's so many times that people that have English as a second language correct our stuff because they know the structure better than we do. So that's not a hindrance. You can overcome that if you feel like that is. It's again, it's your ability to get the idea out of your head onto paper or out of your mouth. And even if it's not perfect, it's okay. But again, the feedback is the important thing. You know, did I say things correctly? Did I write things correctly? And being open to that. And I don't care if you're a native speaker or as a second language, it's the same. There's some excellent professors, right, that English isn't their first language. And there's some horrible professors that English is their first language. And I mean, it's not a language, it's the ability to communicate is the thing.
Yeah, well, I just think that gives you like an advantage if you have English as your first language, because you will have that better vocabulary and everything.
Yeah. But you'll pick it up. I mean, you get there. And again, the ideas, if your ideas are good, even if you don't have the flowery vocabulary, I think that was one of the bullets I had. It's not you're a slick salesman and no big words, it's that you get your ideas out. And I understand what you're saying, and I get excited about what you could do for me. That's the key. Anything else?
Thank you, Dr. Sylvester.
I recommend you get this book if you haven't seen it. It's so amazing. You know, one of the people that do critiques said it's the best business book they've ever read. And so when you read it, you'll see that.
Thank you so much.